The city of Seoul glittered like a neon jewel in the night, skyscrapers piercing the inky sky and lights reflecting off the Han River in a cascade of gold and silver. In this city of ceaseless movement, one man moved above it all. He wasn't just a part of the nightlife, the power plays, or the dangerous backrooms where deals were sealed with a glance or a gun. He ruled them. At 29, he had the wealth of kings, the charm of a movie star, and the reputation of someone who could make men tremble and women swoon, all with the same smile. He sat in his penthouse atop one of Gangnam's tallest towers, swirling amber whiskey in a crystal glass as soft jazz played in the background. The skyline stretched before him, the city alive below, but he was a world apart. Around him, the trappings of a life most people only dreamed of: rare art, imported furniture, and a collection of watches worth more than most families made in a lifetime. A few women lounged in the corners of the room, laughing softly at his dry, teasing remarks, yet their eyes betrayed that their attention wasn't entirely free. They had learned quickly that he was the kind of man who could turn affection into entertainment, intimacy into a game. He had always lived for this, the thrill, the risk, the luxury. Crime wasn't a burden for him. It was an art form, and he was the artist. Every deal, every takeover, every whispered threat from a rival gang fueled him more than money or women ever could. He had no need for love. He considered it a distraction, an unnecessary weakness. He played with hearts because he could, because it was amusing to see them flutter at his slightest command. Yet tonight, something felt different. Or perhaps it was just the monotony of perfection pressing against him. He drained the last drop of whiskey, set the glass down, and stretched across the velvet sofa. The city below carried on in its chaotic rhythm, while he felt, bizarrely, a hint of boredom. Everything in his life was under his control, predictable in its decadence. He had conquered the world he had been born into, yet the emptiness lingered like a shadow behind the gold and velvet. It was on an impulse, a rare one, that he decided to leave the penthouse and wander into the city on his own. He wanted something different tonight, not the predictable sounds of music and laughter or the familiar curve of another woman's smile. He wanted, he didn't know what, something real, maybe, though he would never admit it aloud. The library wasn't a place he would normally find himself. He preferred the roar of nightclubs, the hum of expensive cars, the scent of leather and perfume. But something about the idea of anonymity, of being just another face in the crowd, intrigued him. Maybe he wanted to see if he could be invisible, even for a few hours. The library was quiet, a cool and ordered contrast to the chaos of Gangnam. Rows of bookshelves stretched high, filled with centuries of human thought. The soft rustle of pages and the faint smell of old paper and polished wood filled the air. He wandered aimlessly at first, letting the silence soothe some restless part of him he had long ignored. He could hear the occasional tapping of keyboards, the soft murmur of voices, but mostly there was peace here. A kind of peace he had never experienced in his own life. That's when he saw her. She was standing by the philosophy section, a slim figure with natural poise, flipping through a book with such focus that the world seemed to shrink around her. Her hair framed her face perfectly, and her skin glowed under the soft library lights. She wasn't looking at him, hadn't noticed him, and yet the sight of her stopped him. Not in the way women usually stopped him, with fluttered eyelashes or a shy glance, but something deeper, almost unsettling. There was an authenticity about her, a presence he couldn't manipulate or intimidate, and that made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt before. He lingered near a shelf, pretending to examine a book on business strategy, all the while stealing glances at her. She flipped through her book carefully, almost reverently, and he realized she wasn't someone used to luxury or chaos. She was grounded, deliberate, and intelligent, everything he wasn't. There was no hint of flirtation in her posture, no coy glance that invited attention. She was entirely absorbed in her world, and for the first time he felt like an outsider. Not a master of his environment, but a mere observer. He wanted to speak to her, to test the waters, but found himself hesitating. He wasn't used to hesitation. He wasn't used to wanting something that didn't bend to his will. Usually, he walked into a room and left it changed, with people aware of his presence, of his power. But she could exist without acknowledging him, and that unnerved him more than any rival ever had. Finally, he approached casually as if he belonged. "Excuse me," he said smoothly, his voice low and measured. "Do you know if they have anything on modern philosophy? Nietzsche, Kant, maybe Foucault?" She looked up, startled for a moment, then regarded him with steady brown eyes. "Yes, they're just over there," she said, gesturing down the aisle. Her voice was calm, polite, and utterly unaffected by his presence. For a man used to commanding attention, the casual indifference was like a puzzle he had to solve. He wanted to make her laugh, to draw a reaction, but the words that usually came so easily now faltered. Instead, he simply nodded, following her direction, feeling a strange curiosity bubbling inside him. He watched her for a few more moments, noticing the small details, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the thoughtful crease in her brow as she considered her book. There was no artifice here, no performance, and it fascinated him. He felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, almost dangerous: respect. As he lingered in the quiet aisles, pretending to peruse a book he had no intention of reading, he realized the truth. This wasn't a conquest. She wasn't an amusement. And yet, he wanted to know more about her. The first seed had been planted, small but persistent. A man who thrived on chaos and luxury now found himself entangled in a quiet storm, one that didn't roar, but whispered in the corridors of his mind, promising that perhaps, just perhaps, the rules of his world didn't have to define the limits of his heart. And as she returned to her reading, unaware of the storm she had set in motion, he understood something that would change everything. This encounter was no mere coincidence. This meeting was the first step in a transformation he hadn't sought, but couldn't escape. The next evening, he found himself back at the library. He told himself it was just curiosity, nothing more. A man like him didn't need reason to act on impulse. Luxury, danger, and women had always followed that logic. But this time, he felt the faint pull of something he couldn't name. She was there again, tucked into the same corner with a pile of books by her side. Her focus was absolute. Her brow furrowed as she scribbled notes in a neat notebook. The world outside the library, the neon chaos, the constant hum of a city that never slept, was irrelevant here. She existed in her own bubble, and that was exactly what drew him in. He hovered near the philosophy section again, pretending to read while stealing glances at her. Unlike the women he was used to, she didn't notice his presence at all. There were no flirtatious smiles, no coy looks, no whispered giggles. She didn't belong to him, and for a man who was used to owning every room he walked into, the lack of ownership was intoxicating. When she finally looked up, she caught him watching her. Their eyes met briefly, and he expected irritation or curiosity, or both. But she simply gave a polite nod and returned to her notes. The casual dismissal stung more than any direct challenge ever had. She didn't see him as a man of power. She didn't even see him at all, and it made him realize how unaccustomed he was to being invisible. Over the next week, he returned more often, always under the guise of random interest in books he had no intention of reading. He tried to strike casual conversation several times but faltered each time. With every interaction, he discovered something startling. She wasn't impressed by money, by status, or by charm. His usual arsenal of subtle intimidation, flirtation, and persuasion didn't work. One afternoon, he finally managed to ask a question that didn't feel rehearsed. "Do you ever feel like the world is too fast?" he asked, leaning slightly against a bookshelf as he watched her adjust her glasses. She looked at him, her head tilting slightly. "Too fast?" she repeated, voice calm, steady. "Yes, I suppose. There's always so much to do, so many people rushing to get somewhere. I try to slow it down, to focus on what matters." Her answer, simple as it was, struck him. Focus on what matters. It wasn't a game, it wasn't a performance, it wasn't manipulation. For the first time in years, he realized there was a version of life he had never considered, one that didn't revolve around control, spectacle, or dominance. Days turned into weeks, and their interactions, though brief, began to build an unspoken rhythm. She never invited him in, never smiled seductively, never encouraged his attention. Yet somehow he found himself waiting, timing his visits to coincide with hers. It was no longer about curiosity. It was about her presence, her steadiness, her ability to exist without notice. One evening, a small mishap brought them closer. He reached for a book on the top shelf and, in his usual overconfidence, knocked a stack of philosophy volumes to the floor. The loud crash echoed through the library, drawing the attention of several students. "Oh!" she exclaimed, moving to help him pick up the books. Her hands were quick and efficient, her expression neutral but amused. "Careful," she said softly. "Not everyone gets a second chance with the floor like that." He laughed, a low, genuine sound that surprised even him. "You're not worried I'll destroy the place entirely?" he asked. "Not really," she replied. "People break things all the time. It's how you deal with it afterward that counts." The simplicity of her words, the lack of judgment, unsettled him. No one had ever treated him like that. Not his lieutenants, not rival gang leaders, not the women who chased him. Everyone had expectations, agendas, or fear, and she had none. She existed on her own terms, and it fascinated him more than any luxury car or rare watch ever could. Over the following days, he began to notice other things about her. The way she organized her notes, meticulous yet effortless. The kindness she showed to students who occasionally wandered into the library. The warmth in her voice when she spoke of teaching, of helping others understand the world. She had a calm strength, a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with his life of chaos. He started to see the cracks in his own world. The glittering parties, the dangerous deals, the women who laughed at his jokes and cried when he left. They all felt hollow compared to this. Here, in the quiet corners of the library, he felt something foreign. Curiosity not about conquest, but about connection. One afternoon, as rain streaked down the tall windows of the library, he found himself walking beside her. She was heading toward the exit, umbrella in hand, and he felt an urge to speak, to say something real, something that didn't play into his usual games. "Do you like the rain?" he asked, surprising himself. She looked at him, slightly puzzled. "I do. It slows everything down, makes the city quieter. It's peaceful." He nodded, staring out at the glistening streets below. Peaceful. That word lingered in his mind. It was alien, tempting, and terrifying all at once. In his life, there had been no quiet, no peace. Only constant motion, constant demand, constant danger. And yet, he found himself wanting that stillness, wanting to see it reflected in her eyes. For the first time in his life, he realized he wanted something he couldn't take, couldn't buy, couldn't manipulate. He wanted her, not as a conquest, not as a distraction, but as a person. A real person with thoughts and feelings that mattered. And that realization scared him more than any rival, any gun, any threat in the city ever had. Because if he wanted her, he would have to change. And a man who ruled the underworld didn't change. Or so he had always believed. After that rainy afternoon, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Every drive in his sleek black car, every lavish dinner, every carefully orchestrated meeting with underlings felt hollow, like noise in the background of a life that suddenly seemed smaller than he had imagined. He began noticing things he had never cared about before. The quiet beauty of autumn leaves along the Han River, the soft light spilling across the library shelves, the sound of people laughing without needing anything from him. He returned to the library more frequently, each time hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Some days she was there, absorbed in her notes, or reading aloud softly to herself while marking passages. Other days she was gone, and he felt a sharp disappointment, though he would never admit it. No one had ever had such an effect on him. No woman had ever been a challenge in the sense that she wasn't a challenge at all. She was simply herself, and that authenticity was disarming. One afternoon, as he lingered near the history section pretending to read, she looked up and smiled briefly, not flirtatiously, but warmly in acknowledgement. That small gesture sent a jolt through him. It wasn't power. It wasn't manipulation. It was simply recognition. and that recognition meant more to him than any accolade or title he had ever earned. "You come here a lot," she said lightly, her voice calm but with a hint of curiosity. I like books," he said, keeping his tone casual. It sounded weak even to him. "History, philosophy, things like that." She raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Sure," she said, but didn't press. The conversation ended there, yet something had shifted. She had looked at him as a person, not a man with a reputation, a lifestyle, or a title. It was the first time he felt unseen yet understood, a paradox that left him restless with longing. That evening, he returned to his penthouse and found it unbearably empty. The women lounging around, the music, the champagne. It all felt meaningless. He poured himself a drink but didn't take a sip. Instead, he stared out at the city lights, thinking about her quiet presence, her thoughtful gaze, the way she seemed anchored in a world he had never known. The realization hit him harder than any rival confrontation ever had. His life was shallow. His power was meaningless without someone to share it with, and for the first time he craved something deeper than pleasure or prestige. The next few weeks became a delicate dance. He would arrive at the library, often at the same time she did, trying to find excuses to be near her without imposing. She never invited him to sit beside her or to join in her studies, and that frustrated him at first. He was used to immediate results, to control, to bending the world to his will. But she was different. She was patient, kind, and independent, and that forced him to confront a weakness he had long ignored: patience. One afternoon, she dropped a stack of papers and books from her lap, and he instinctively moved to help her. Their hands brushed, and the contact sent a strange warmth through him. She looked at him, calm, unflustered. "Thank you," she said simply. No teasing, no coyness, just gratitude. "You're welcome," he replied, realizing he wanted to say more, wanted to express something he hadn't yet named. He hesitated, then added, "You have a lot of patience." She smiled softly. "You have to if you want to teach." Her words lingered in his mind long after he left the library. Patience. Not just in teaching, but in life, in relationships, in understanding people. He had never needed patience. He had always acted first, conquered first, claimed first. The concept was foreign to him, yet somehow it resonated. He began noticing other things about himself as well. The way he had laughed too loudly at parties to mask emptiness. The way he had chased women not for connection but for amusement. The way he had avoided genuine conversations because they demanded honesty he wasn't willing to give. And the way, increasingly, he wanted to change that, not for the sake of others but for the possibility of her. One evening, as dusk fell over Seoul and the city lights flickered on, he saw her packing up to leave. He walked beside her silently for a few moments, their steps falling into an awkward rhythm. Then he asked, almost impulsively, "Do you want to get coffee sometime?" She stopped and turned to look at him, her expression carefully neutral. "Coffee?" she repeated. "Yes," he said, feeling a sudden vulnerability in his own voice. I'd like to talk. About books, about life, about whatever." She studied him for a moment, her eyes steady, then nodded. "All right, tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," he confirmed, feeling an unexpected thrill. That night he couldn't sleep. He walked the halls of his penthouse, the city sprawling below, thinking about her. He had never felt anticipation like this. It wasn't lust, not exactly. It was curiosity, concern, admiration, and something he couldn't name. He had never wanted to know someone for who they truly were, not beyond their usefulness, entertainment, or allure. And yet, here he was, thinking about her laugh, the way she tilted her head when reading, the gentle firmness in her voice. The next day, they met at a small cafe near the library. It was quiet, unassuming, a place where they could talk without the weight of his world pressing in. He expected her to be distant, to keep their conversation superficial, but she was open, warm, and thoughtful. They spoke about books, about teaching, about life in Seoul. For the first time, he found himself sharing parts of his own life. Not the business deals, the parties, the criminal exploits, but his thoughts, his frustrations, his fleeting doubts about the emptiness he felt. She listened, really listened, without judgment. That simple act, so ordinary in the world of teaching, struck him profoundly. He realized that for the first time in his life, someone saw him. Not the boss, not the man feared by gangs and worshipped by women, but the person beneath it all. And as they sat together, sharing ideas and quiet laughter, he understood that this was dangerous. Not because of enemies or rival gangs, but because she had the power to change him. And he wasn't sure he wanted to be changed, or perhaps he was terrified that he did. For the first time, he saw the possibility of a life that was richer not because of wealth or power, but because of connection. And he knew, deep down, that nothing in his world of luxury, crime, and casual games would ever feel the same again. Days passed, and the quiet rhythm of their meetings at the cafe and library became a strange, grounding constant in his otherwise turbulent life. He began to notice details about her that seemed to carve their way into his mind. How she cradled her coffee cup like it was a delicate artifact. How her laughter, soft and unassuming, seemed to linger longer than it should, echoing in a part of him he had long ignored. Yet, as comforting as these encounters were, the world he ruled didn't pause for him to explore human connection. He returned to the penthouse, to the roaring nights, the glittering parties, the whispered deals with men who feared him yet depended on him. He moved through that world with ease, yet lately, each triumph felt hollow, each victory muted. For the first time, the thought struck him. Maybe all of this wasn't enough. And that thought scared him. One evening, he received word that a rival gang had been encroaching on one of his territories. His lieutenants came in, tense and respectful, outlining plans and threats, the language of intimidation he had mastered since he was 20. He listened, nodding, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He thought about the teacher, the way she had smiled at him that morning, the way she had described her small classroom full of curious students. Could she exist in his world if chaos found her? Could he even let her? A part of him wanted to dismiss it, to laugh at the thought and bury himself deeper into his world of control and indulgence. But another part, the part that had begun to recognize emptiness where he had once found triumph, couldn't ignore it. He realized, with a mixture of awe and terror, that he cared about her safety, that she mattered to him. The next afternoon, he found himself at the library, pacing silently between the shelves as she organized her notes. She looked up and smiled. A small, knowing smile that made his chest tighten. "You seem distracted," she observed gently. He tried to laugh it off. "Just a lot on my mind," he said, though the words felt hollow. How could he explain that the things on his mind were people who wanted to kill him, and that he was terrified that she could be caught in the crossfire of a life she knew nothing about? She didn't press, simply returned to her notes. Her calm acceptance of his evasiveness only made him more restless. He wasn't used to patience. He wasn't used to people who didn't demand or manipulate. And the more he was around her, the more he realized how much he wanted to be worthy of her attention, her trust. That night, he sat alone in his office, the city lights shimmering like molten gold beneath him. He poured a glass of whiskey, but it tasted like ash. The women he called companions drifted through the penthouse, laughing and teasing, but he barely noticed. He thought of her, thought of the way she had asked him about books as if she were genuinely curious, thought of the way she existed in a world that had nothing to do with his, and yet somehow she had reached him. He realized something terrifying. He wanted to change. Not superficially, not for appearances, not to impress her. He wanted to become a different man, someone capable of holding himself accountable, of caring more than just for power and pleasure. And the thought of that transformation filled him with both hope and dread. He had built his empire on fear and domination. Could he ever step back from that without losing himself? The next day, he arrived at the library earlier than usual. She was arranging a small display of children's literature near the back, her expression serene. Seeing her like this, so at ease, so grounded, made him realize how stark the contrast was between their lives. He wanted to be near her, to talk, but the weight of his other life pressed down on him. He wondered if she would ever truly understand the world he inhabited, the ruthlessness, the violence, the games of power. He tried to distract himself with books, scanning titles and pretending to read. She glanced up occasionally, her eyes meeting his briefly, and each time it sent a small jolt through him. She had a way of looking at him as though she knew him but didn't judge him, and that was more powerful than any weapon he had ever wielded. Their interaction was interrupted by a sudden commotion outside the library doors. A minor mugging, easily ignored by the authorities, but enough to make him tense. He instinctively moved closer to her, his body rigid, his senses alert. The world he had mastered, the dangerous, violent, unpredictable world, was never far behind. He realized, with a sinking feeling, that it could intrude into this quiet, ordered space at any moment. After the commotion passed, she looked at him, a faint frown in her expression. "Are you okay?" she asked. The simple concern in her voice struck him in a way no threat or gun ever had. "Yes," he said, though the answer felt insufficient. "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. He was terrified. Terrified that he couldn't protect her from the life he had chosen, terrified that being near her was changing him in ways he couldn't control, and terrified that his feelings, whatever they were, made him vulnerable in ways he had never allowed himself to be. The days that followed were a subtle battle between his old instincts and the emerging desire to be better. At night, he found himself avoiding his usual haunts, wandering the city instead, thinking about her, imagining what it would mean to truly connect with someone outside his sphere of power. He started questioning the meaning of his victories, the thrill of manipulation, the hollow laughter of women who didn't care for him beyond amusement. One evening, he returned to the library with a book she had recommended, a simple volume of essays on human behavior. She looked up, surprised, and then smiled. "You read it." "I started it," he admitted, feeling an unfamiliar awkwardness. "It's interesting." She tilted her head. "Interesting how?" He hesitated. How could he explain that the essays made him question the very foundations of his life? That they made him realize he had been living only for power and pleasure, and that he needed something more? He simply said, "It makes you think about what matters." She nodded thoughtfully, her gaze softening. "That's the point." It was a small moment, but for him it was monumental. He realized that this wasn't just fascination, not just a passing curiosity. He was changing, and for the first time he wanted to be changed. Not out of fear, not for status, not for manipulation, but because of her. That night, alone in his penthouse, he poured himself a drink he didn't touch and stared out at the city, thinking about the quiet teacher who had entered his life and, unknowingly, begun dismantling the walls he had spent decades building. He felt exposed, vulnerable, and alive. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about control, money, or danger. He was thinking about her. And he knew that nothing in his world, nothing at all, would ever feel the same again. She had noticed him from the first day, of course. A tall man, impeccably dressed, with an air that suggested he owned every space he entered. But at first she thought little of it. Seoul was full of people who demanded attention without giving it much thought, and she had learned early that the world could not dictate her curiosity. He was different, though. There was a subtle tension in him, a weight behind his casual movements. The first day she glanced at him in the philosophy aisle, she caught a flash of something unusual, awareness. Not arrogance, not expectation, but observation. And she had found herself intrigued. Over the weeks, she had noticed his persistence, though it was never intrusive. He didn't force conversation, didn't linger too long, didn't flaunt charm. He simply existed nearby, sometimes reading, sometimes watching, often appearing lost in thought. He seemed to belong to another world entirely, yet he was drawn to this one, the quiet one she inhabited. Puzzled her, and that was why she found herself curious. She didn't know who he was, not truly. Occasionally, she saw him speaking on the phone in low, serious tones, his expression sharp, commanding. Sometimes, men appeared briefly beside him, looking nervous, deferential. She had learned to sense tension. It came easily after years of teaching. He carried power and danger like a second skin. Yet, when he spoke to her, the dangerous edge softened. He asked questions, not in a tone that demanded answers, but as if he genuinely wanted to understand. He listened. He remembered the small details. He asked follow-ups, never probing, never condescending. It was unusual, rare, and she found herself responding, opening small windows into her life. "You seem different when you talk to me," she said one afternoon, as they sat in their usual corner with coffee cups steaming between them. Her voice was calm, measured, but curious. He froze for a moment, then gave a half-smile. "Different how?" "You listen," she said simply. "Most people, most men, they talk at you, around you, even when they pretend to listen. You don't. You actually listen." The words lingered. For a man accustomed to commanding rooms and controlling people, they were startling. He wasn't used to being acknowledged for the way he paid attention, for the restraint he exercised in a world that rewarded dominance. It felt strange, gratifying, and unsettling all at once. "I suppose I like to understand," he said carefully, aware that vulnerability in his world was dangerous, even lethal if misplaced. "Understanding makes everything clearer." She nodded, though her gaze softened. "Clarity can be good," she said. "It can also be dangerous if misused." He laughed lightly, a sound rare in his penthouse or his boardrooms. "I suppose that depends on the world you inhabit," he said, his tone almost teasing but layered with honesty. She didn't press, simply sipped her coffee, and he found himself fascinated by her restraint, by her ability to be present, and by the quiet strength that seemed to radiate without effort. Days later, the first sign of the dangerous world he inhabited began to bleed into hers. A man appeared near the library, watching her with unsettling interest. She didn't know why at first. She only felt a prickling unease, the sort that teachers often learn to notice in children, in strangers, in situations that seem ordinary at first glance. He appeared beside her before she could fully react. "You shouldn't be alone right now," he said softly, his tone carrying that unshakable authority that had long defined him. She glanced at him, her heart catching slightly at the intensity in his gaze. "What?" she began, but he shook his head. "Nothing. Just, let's move," he said, his hand brushing lightly against hers in a protective gesture that made her pulse quicken. As they exited the library together, the man who had been watching them melted into the crowd, unseen now. She didn't understand who he was or why he had appeared, but she felt safe, an unusual feeling in a city that often felt chaotic and impersonal. She looked at him, searching his expression. There was a tension there, a hardness softened only by his concern for her. "Who was that?" she asked quietly, as if speaking louder would summon danger. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said, though his jaw tightened slightly. "Just someone I needed to be aware of." Her mind was swirling, curiosity mixing with a faint fear. She realized, for the first time, that this man, who had seemed so distant, so detached, had a world she had never imagined, and she didn't know if she wanted to be part of it. At the cafe the next day, she was quieter than usual. Her usual warmth and steady demeanor were tinged with thoughtfulness, maybe even concern. He noticed immediately. "You've been thinking," he said softly, studying her face. I suppose I have," she admitted, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "I don't understand your world, and maybe I don't want to." He nodded, recognizing the honesty in her words. "You don't have to," he said. "I shouldn't ask you to." There was a pause, thick with unspoken tension. He wanted to explain, to reassure, but he knew that words from his world often failed. They were either empty or too heavy with implication. He had spent his life carefully constructing an image, managing perception, controlling outcomes. With her, none of that worked. She saw him, really saw him, in ways no one else did. And that terrified him. "I like spending time with you," he said finally, his voice low and almost tentative. "Even though I know I bring complications." She looked at him, her gaze steady and measured. Complications exist in every life, she said gently. It's how you navigate them that matters. Her words struck him deeply. She wasn't afraid. Not of him, not of the danger she had glimpsed, not of the uncertainty he represented. She simply acknowledged it, and in that acknowledgement, she gave him a strange kind of strength. The next few days were a delicate balance. He continued his empire building. Meetings with lieutenants, careful negotiations with rivals, the luxury, the thrill, but always with her in the back of his mind. Every decision he made, every risk he took, was now filtered through the lens of her presence. Could she be safe? Could he remain the man he was while also protecting someone he truly cared about? For the first time, he didn't have the answers, and that vulnerability, that uncertainty, was more thrilling and terrifying than any deal, any heist, any conquest he had ever orchestrated. Because now, he was invested in more than power. He was invested in her. And that was a risk he wasn't sure he was ready for, but couldn't walk away from either. The following week brought a subtle, creeping tension that even he could not ignore. Business had been unusually turbulent, rival factions testing boundaries, old allies growing restless, and whispers of betrayal carried through the streets like smoke. He had always thrived in chaos, wielding it like a weapon, but now his mind was divided. Every move he made, every decision in the backrooms and alleys, carried an added weight. Her safety. She remained unaware of the storm. To her, he was just the quiet, enigmatic man who visited the library and occasionally shared coffee. Her days were filled with lessons, grading papers, and guiding students through the world of ideas. She did not and could not understand the reach of the life he led, and he knew that to bring her into it, even inadvertently, could be catastrophic. It started subtly. A black SUV parked too long near her apartment, men loitering in alleyways near the library. A note slipped under the door of a cafe she frequented, unsigned but threatening in tone. He noticed all of it, piecing it together quickly, understanding the risk. The city had rules, and so did he, and one of them was that anyone who threatened those close to him paid a price. He cornered one of his lieutenants late at night in the dim light of the penthouse, the city glowing below like fire. "She's close to you," he said, his voice low, a rare tension threading through it. "She?" the lieutenant asked, frowning. "A teacher. A woman. Someone I care about," he admitted, the words tasting strange on his tongue. Vulnerability was foreign, and yet necessary now. "She's being watched. I need to know who, and I need it handled quietly. No traces, no attention." The lieutenant's eyes flickered with understanding and caution. "Understood. But you're asking us to tread a line. Her life is civilian. Pulling our world in could have consequences." He nodded sharply. "I know. And that's why I'll handle it personally if I have to. No one touches her." He didn't tell the lieutenant that the threat gnawed at him in ways a rival or a rival's men never could. This wasn't business. It was personal. It was something he had never allowed himself to experience before. Genuine fear for someone's well-being. Meanwhile, she remained blissfully unaware of the danger encroaching around her. She noticed only that he seemed more distracted, more thoughtful, quieter than usual during their meetings. She asked him about it once at the library, gently, sensing a weight he wasn't sharing. "It's nothing," he said, giving a half-smile. "Just a lot on my mind." She studied him carefully, as she always did. "You're carrying something," she said. "You don't have to face it alone." Her words, simple yet sincere, cut deeper than any threat, any confrontation, any challenge in the criminal world he navigated. He had spent years building walls, isolating himself, masking vulnerability behind wealth, charm, and control. She made those walls feel unnecessary and frighteningly fragile. That evening, he decided he couldn't leave things to chance. He followed her discreetly from the library to her apartment, staying in the shadows, watching. Every suspicious glance, every lingering shadow, every unfamiliar figure walking past was noted. He observed, calculated, planned, but his mind was not on strategy alone. He was thinking of her laugh, the small tilt of her head as she read, the thoughtful way she organized her notes. And he realized something he had never felt before. He wanted to protect her not for power, not for control, not for status, but because he cared. Purely and simply. That night, he returned to the penthouse with a weight he had never known. He moved through the rooms filled with opulence, luxury, and indulgence. Yet none of it mattered. The women lounging around him, the music, the drink. They were all irrelevant. All that mattered was her safety, her calm, her presence in the world untouched by the darkness he commanded. Over the next few days, he began to take subtle steps to shield her. He hired discreet security near her apartment, repositioned his assets in the city to cover any potential threats, and even manipulated rival gangs' movements to avoid drawing attention to her. Each decision reminded him of the line he was walking. One wrong move, and she could be drawn into the violent, unpredictable life he ruled. Yet, amid the tension, he noticed small, almost imperceptible changes in himself. He found himself anticipating her reactions, wanting to understand her needs, her fears, her desires. Not to manipulate them, not to control them, but to support her. He had never done this before. He had never allowed anyone to matter beyond the moment. And now, every thought, every plan, every strategy had a silent undercurrent. How would this affect her? One evening, she invited him to join her at a small book reading in a nearby cafe. He hesitated. He was supposed to be guarding her from the shadows, but ultimately he agreed. The warmth of the room, the scent of coffee, and the soft murmurs of attentive listeners were worlds apart from the flashing lights of his empire. And yet, sitting across from her, sharing the space of calm she inhabited, he felt something he hadn't in years: peace. As the night ended, he walked her to the library's exit. Outside, the streets were quiet, rain-dampened, and shimmering under the city lights. He wanted to tell her everything. The threats, the danger, the life he led, but he knew he couldn't. She had no place in that world, not fully. And yet, he wanted her to know why he cared. Instead, he said, softly, "Be careful." She smiled, unaware of the storm, but with a quiet trust that unsettled him. "Always," she said. Walking away, he realized that this was no longer about power or pleasure or conquest. This was about her. Protecting her meant more than any victory in the streets, more than any indulgence, more than anything he had ever known. And that realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. He understood now that the line between his world and hers could not be blurred easily. He would have to navigate it carefully, balancing the darkness he commanded with the light she brought into his life. And for the first time, he considered the possibility that he might not be able to live fully in one world without risking the other. But he also knew this: he couldn't let her go. In the following days, the rhythm of their meetings subtly shifted. He was no longer content with fleeting encounters in the library or brief coffee breaks. He wanted to know her thoughts, her routines, her world, as if by understanding them he could shield her from the chaos he carried like a shadow. She, in turn, began to notice subtle changes in him. The way he watched over her, not with dominance, but with quiet vigilance. The moments when his gaze would flicker toward the street outside the library, scanning for threats she could not see. The tension that seemed to linger beneath the otherwise calm exterior. One afternoon, as they sat together discussing a book about human behavior, she paused and looked at him thoughtfully. "You're different around me," she said. Her voice was calm, but her words carried curiosity. He hesitated, caught off guard. No one had ever confronted him like this. Not rivals, not allies, not women who had tried to sway him. "Different how?" he asked, careful to keep his tone neutral. "You care," she said simply. "Not just about appearances or results or control. You care. I can see it." The words struck him uncomfortably warm. He had never allowed anyone to notice that part of him. Caring was dangerous. It was a vulnerability, a crack in the armor he had spent decades perfecting. Yet she saw it, and somehow her recognition didn't feel like judgment. It felt grounding. "I suppose I do," he admitted quietly. surprising himself with the honesty. "It's new." She smiled softly, a quiet encouragement, and he felt an unfamiliar flutter of relief. She wasn't scared. She wasn't recoiling. She simply accepted him, cautiously but fully, as he was. That night, as he returned to his penthouse, he replayed her words over and over in his mind. "You care." He had never admitted that about himself before. Not aloud. Not even to the few people he trusted. And the realization that he was drawn so completely to her, beyond desire, beyond convenience, beyond amusement, terrified him. His world was never meant for attachment, for trust, for vulnerability. And yet, he found himself craving her presence, her voice, her calm amidst the chaos. A week later, the first real danger arrived. A rival gang had learned of her proximity to him. Their intentions weren't clear, but the threat was unmistakable. A letter arrived, slipped under her door. A crude warning, and signed but unmistakable in tone. He discovered it immediately, piecing together the situation with the efficiency honed over years. The life he led, one built on power, fear, and control, was bleeding into hers. And for the first time he felt a gnawing panic. Not for himself, not for his empire, but for her. He went to her apartment that night, quietly, and found her examining the letter with a calm he didn't feel. "It's nothing, really," she said, trying to dismiss the fear that he could see in her eyes. "It's not nothing," he said firmly, taking the paper from her hands. "Someone has noticed you because of me. You shouldn't have to deal with this. Ever." She looked at him, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "And now I handle it," he said, his voice low and unwavering. "You stay out of it. You don't need to see this world, and I won't let it touch you." Her eyes softened, but she didn't argue. She trusted him, not blindly, but with a faith that unsettled him, because it made him aware of how much he had at stake. Protecting her was no longer a matter of pride or control. It was necessity. It was instinct. It was something he had never felt for anyone before. In the following days, he orchestrated subtle changes in the city's streets. Surveillance, quiet intimidation, controlled movements of rival factions, all to ensure she remained untouched, unaware, and safe. Every decision he made reminded him of the fragility of their connection. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and everything could crumble. Yet, amid the tension, their bond deepened. Small gestures, coffee left on a desk, a shared book, a quiet laugh became lifelines. She noticed the care in his actions, even if she didn't fully understand the extent of the world he navigated. He noticed her resilience, her calm courage, her ability to remain herself in the face of uncertainty. One evening, walking together along a quiet street near the Han River, he broke a silence that had been stretching for several blocks. "You know, life doesn't always offer chances like this," he said softly, his gaze fixed on the shimmering water. "Moments of calm, of clarity. And He hesitated, swallowing a rare vulnerability. "I don't want to waste it." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "Clarity doesn't always last," she said. "But that doesn't mean it isn't worth cherishing when it appears." He nodded, feeling the truth in her words. For the first time, he recognized that his life of chaos, his empire, his games, his pleasures, was empty without connection, without someone who mattered beyond his own reflection. She mattered, more than he had ever let himself admit, more than he had ever allowed anyone to matter. That night, he returned to the penthouse with a restless mind. He realized that the balance between his two worlds, his dangerous life and the life he was beginning to crave with her, would not be easy. Protecting her would require vigilance, restraint, and an honesty he had never afforded himself. And loving her, even silently, would require a surrender that terrified him. Yet he knew deep down that he could not walk away. Not now, not ever. Because she had shown him a life worth more than luxury, power, or indulgence. A life that demanded courage, vulnerability, and care. And for the first time, he wanted to live it. The following morning, he received a call that made his chest tighten. A man associated with a rival gang had been spotted near the school where she taught, asking questions about her schedule and routines. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't a warning slipped under a door. It was a direct approach, a probe into the world she occupied, into the life he had vowed to protect from the shadows. He didn't hesitate. There was no room for delay or negotiation. He contacted his closest lieutenants, issuing precise instructions. Watch, track, intercept if necessary, but maintain discretion. He would not allow her life to be drawn into the violence he commanded. He arrived at the school during her lunch break, slipping quietly into the courtyard where she usually took walks. She was sitting on a bench, reading a book, the sunlight filtering through the trees casting dappled patterns across her hair. To anyone else, she seemed utterly ordinary. To him, she was everything he had never realized he wanted to protect. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said, stepping out of the shadows, his voice low, calm, but carrying an intensity she couldn't ignore. She looked up, startled but not afraid. I'm fine," she said, though her gaze betrayed a flicker of unease. "The grounds are safe." He shook his head. "Not entirely," he said. "You've been followed. Someone's asking questions." Her eyes widened, and she instinctively clutched her book closer. "Who, why?" "I don't know why yet," he admitted. "But I do know you're not going to face it alone." For the first time, he took her hand, guiding her toward the exit. The touch was gentle, protective, but not possessive. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let herself be led, a quiet trust forming between them that unsettled him with its simplicity. Outside, a black car waited discreetly nearby. He ushered her inside, keeping his gaze forward as he slid into the driver's seat. As they moved through the streets, he explained cautiously, revealing fragments of his world, carefully filtered, enough for her to understand the danger without being terrified. "There are people who want to hurt you," he said quietly. "Not for anything you've done. Because of me." She was silent for a moment, absorbing the words. "Because of you?" she repeated, her voice steady, though tinged with concern. "But why would anyone want to hurt me because of you?" He took a deep breath, realizing that he couldn't shield her entirely from the truth forever. "I live in a world that's complicated," he said carefully. "A world where power matters, and where people make threats to get what they want. You've crossed into that world simply by being near me. That's my fault." Her gaze met his, unwavering. "Then I trust you to protect me," she said softly. "I know it's not easy, and I know it's dangerous, but I trust you." The words hit him like a thunderclap. Trust. No one had ever spoken that word to him with such quiet conviction, with such acceptance of his flaws and danger. It was terrifying and exhilarating. The days that followed were tense. He orchestrated a protective net around her life, tracking movements, intercepting threats before they could approach. Each action reminded him of the stakes, and each success was a quiet, unsung victory. But even as he controlled the external dangers, he grappled with the internal ones. The feelings growing inside him, the desire to bring her closer to a life she might not survive if fully revealed. Despite the looming danger, they found moments of reprieve. Short walks through quiet streets, brief visits to cafes, stolen hours in the library. Each moment was a precious sanctuary from the storm, allowing them to connect, to share pieces of themselves that neither had ever offered to another. One evening, as they walked along a bridge overlooking the Han River, she turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "You don't have to carry all of this alone," she said gently. "Even if the world you live in is dangerous, even if it's complicated, you don't have to face it by yourself." He looked at her, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "I'm not used to leaning on anyone," he admitted. "I've spent my life relying on control, on power, on fear. But with you, I feel like I could be something different." Her hand brushed against his, tentative but deliberate. "You can be," she said softly, "if you want to, and you're not alone anymore." Her words were simple, but they resonated deeper than anything he had ever experienced. For years, he had controlled his world, manipulating outcomes, bending people and situations to his will. And yet, here she was, offering him something he could not command. Connection, trust, and a possibility of love untouched by fear or ambition. That night, as he returned to the penthouse, he realized something profound. His life had been defined by power and pleasure, by indulgence and control. But in her presence, he had discovered a new kind of strength. A strength born of care, vulnerability, and the desire to protect something precious. For the first time, he considered what it would mean to change. Not superficially, not for show, but fundamentally. To prioritize someone else's life, happiness, and trust above his empire, above his indulgences, above his carefully cultivated image of invincibility. And he knew, with unwavering certainty, that he could not walk away from her, because she had shown him a world worth living for, one beyond power, beyond wealth, beyond fear. And he would do anything to protect it, even if it meant confronting the full weight of the life he had built. The tension in the city had been mounting for weeks, and he knew it was only a matter of time before the rival factions made a decisive move. Every decision, every strategy, every patrol had been calculated to protect her. But tonight, he felt the shift in the air. The unmistakable sense that patience had run out, and action was inevitable. He received the tip late in the evening. A rival gang was mobilizing, targeting one of his key operations. But more troubling was the information that they had somehow discovered her connection to him. She was innocent in every sense. Yet the world he controlled had already drawn a line through her life. He didn't hesitate. Leaving nothing to chance, he gathered his most trusted men and positioned them strategically around the city. Every street, every alley, every potential escape route was monitored. Yet, even as the plans were set, he knew he would need to confront this threat personally. There was no room for error, especially now. Meanwhile, she was preparing to leave the library, unaware of the storm gathering beyond its walls. He arrived quietly, slipping into the shadows, watching. Her presence was fragile against the weight of the world she did not yet fully comprehend. "You shouldn't go out tonight," he said firmly, appearing beside her as if materializing from the night itself. She looked up, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "Why? What's happening?" "There's a situation," he said, careful with his words. "One that could affect you if you're out there. You stay here. No exceptions." Her gaze met his, steady but not fearful. "I trust you," she said softly. "I know you'll handle it." He didn't respond immediately. Her trust was a gift, and a responsibility he had never known before. "I will," he said finally, the word carrying both reassurance and promise. As she remained safely inside, he moved into the streets, a calculated storm of presence and authority. The rival gang had chosen to strike at a small warehouse, hoping to send a message. But he was ready. Every step he took, every glance, every command to his men was precise, efficient, and mercilessly effective. The confrontation was swift. He moved like a shadow, his men surrounding the rival operatives with an almost choreographed precision. Threats were neutralized before they could materialize, intimidation applied where necessary, and control asserted with the quiet ferocity that had earned him both fear and respect. By the time the last of the rivals retreated, the streets were silent, the threat neutralized. Yet the victory was hollow. He returned to her side immediately, checking to ensure she had remained safe, untouched by the violence that defined his life. "You're unharmed," he said quietly, relief threading through his usually controlled voice. "I am," she replied, her tone calm, though her eyes reflected a new awareness. "But I understand now. I understand why you're like this, why you live in that world. And I see why it's dangerous for anyone near you." He studied her, the depth of comprehension in her eyes striking him. No fear, no judgment, just understanding and quiet acceptance. "It's not a world I would wish on anyone," he admitted, "especially not someone like you. And yet, it's my world, and it always will be. But you, You matter too much for me to let it touch you. Her hand brushed against his arm, tentative but deliberate. Then let me be a part of your world, even if it's just a small part. I want to understand. Not to live in danger, but to understand you. Her words, simple and brave, struck him harder than any confrontation, any threat, any victory he had ever known. She didn't want to change him. She didn't want to control him. She simply wanted to see him fully, understand him, and accept him for who he was. That night, as they walked together along the quiet streets, he felt a shift inside himself. For years, he had ruled through fear, manipulation, and pleasure. And yet, here she was, challenging the very core of who he was, showing him that strength could exist without violence, that connection could exist without compromise, that love could exist without pretense. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance between his dangerous world and the fragile bond they were forming. Each day brought small victories, shared conversations, quiet walks, brief moments of laughter. And each day brought reminders of the peril surrounding them. But with every challenge, their trust deepened, their bond strengthened, and his feelings became impossible to deny. One evening, after ensuring the city streets were clear and his men were positioned for any eventuality, he found himself sitting across from her in a small, quiet cafe. The weight of his world pressed against the edges of the moment, but for once, he let it fade. "You've changed me," he said quietly, surprising even himself with the confession. "I've spent years living for nothing but control, for nothing but myself. And now I want more. I want to care. I want to protect. I want to be better." Her gaze met his, steady and unflinching. "You already are," she said softly. "You just needed someone to remind you that life can be more than power and fear. That connection, trust, and care, they're not weaknesses. They're strength." The words echoed inside him, striking deeper than any threat, any victory, any indulgence he had ever known. She was right. Strength wasn't measured in fear or dominance. Strength was measured in the courage to care, to trust, and to protect what mattered most. And in that quiet cafe, amidst the city lights and the soft hum of conversation, he realized that she mattered most. For the first time in his life, he didn't just survive. He lived, and it was because of her. The weeks that followed the confrontation were quieter, but no less intense. For the first time, he found himself thinking about a life that wasn't dictated solely by power, control, and fear. A life where mornings could be spent over coffee with someone who cared, evenings could carry laughter instead of tension, and nights could be quiet without the constant hum of danger pressing against the walls. She had become that life. Simple, grounded, human. And yet, even as he craved it, he knew that fully stepping into it was impossible. Not without risk, not without exposing her to the darker edges of the world he ruled. They met at the library one afternoon, the autumn sunlight filtering through the tall windows. She was absorbed in a book about education theory, her brow furrowed slightly in concentration. He watched her from a distance, noting the gentle curve of her posture, the way her fingers traced the lines of text. In another life, he might have thought it beautiful but irrelevant. In this life, it was everything. "You're quiet today," she said suddenly, looking up. He stepped closer, settling into the chair across from her. "I've been thinking," he admitted, "about life, about choices, about you." She smiled, the kind of smile that was gentle but held quiet understanding. "And?" she prompted. "And I realize," he said slowly, weighing each word, "that I've been living for everything except what matters most. I've built an empire, yes, but what is it worth if there's no one I care about enough to protect beyond duty?" Her gaze softened. "You've already started protecting more than duty," she said. "You've been choosing to care, even when it's dangerous, even when it's inconvenient. That's what matters." Her words struck him with clarity. He had never considered that strength could be measured by empathy, by connection, by vulnerability. And now, her presence, her insight, had forced him to see that the life he had built was hollow without someone to share it with. without someone whose trust and happiness mattered more than his own indulgences. Being with you, it makes me think about more than power, he admitted. More than control. More than anything I've known. She reached across the table, her hand brushing against his. Then maybe it's time to think about something new, she said softly. Not a life without risk, but a life where the risks are worth it. A life where love and care matter as much as survival or success. The words lingered in the air, soft but insistent. He felt a stirring inside him, a mixture of desire, hope, and fear. To imagine a life beyond his empire was terrifying. It meant vulnerability. It meant uncertainty. It meant stepping into a world where he could not control everything. And yet he felt the pull. The promise of something real, something enduring, something human. Over the next few days, he began making subtle changes. He stayed closer to her, observing, protecting, but also listening, learning, and sharing small parts of himself she had never seen before. He revealed the nuances of his world cautiously, never in full, but enough that she could understand why certain precautions were necessary, why certain actions were unavoidable. She listened, not with fear, but with curiosity and acceptance. She asked questions, gently probing, trying to understand without judgment. And with every conversation, every shared moment, the walls around him weakened, allowing pieces of his true self to emerge, pieces he had never dared to show anyone. One evening, they walked along a quiet street near the Han River. The city lights reflected in the water, a golden shimmer that made the world seem almost unreal. He glanced at her, noticing the calm confidence in her step, the quiet strength in her gaze. "I can't promise you a life without danger," he said softly, "but I can promise you this. I will do everything I can to keep you safe. I will do everything I can to be the man worthy of your trust." She looked at him, her eyes steady. "And I can promise you this," she said. "I trust you. I know your world is complicated, and I know you carry burdens I don't fully understand. But I see you, and I accept you for all that you are." The words struck him with a force he had never anticipated. Trust, acceptance, connection. Not domination, not fear, not indulgence. Real human connection. That night, as he returned to his penthouse, he felt a strange weight lift from his shoulders. He knew that challenges would come, rival gangs, threats, the shadows of his past. But for the first time, he believed that he could face them without losing himself, without losing her. He realized that love, trust, and care could be more powerful than fear and control. That protecting someone didn't just mean shielding them from danger, but also nurturing the bond that made them worth protecting. And in her presence, he saw a life worth striving for. A life where the light of connection and trust outweighed the shadows of power and fear. For the first time, he dared to imagine a future that was not dictated solely by his empire, his indulgences, or his past. A future where he could be more than a man of power and fear. A future where he could be a man who loved, who trusted, and who truly lived. And as he thought of her, quietly reading in the warm glow of the library, he knew that the path forward, though uncertain, was one he wanted to walk, together with her. The city never truly slept, and neither did his vigilance. Even after weeks of careful planning, monitoring rival movements, and ensuring her safety, he knew the threats would never fully disappear. But something had shifted inside him, something far more powerful than fear or power. Purpose. Protecting her wasn't just about control anymore. It was about love, trust, and building a life that could exist alongside the chaos. That evening, he found her waiting in the library as usual, a warm smile on her face and a book clutched to her chest. It was the simplicity of the scene that struck him, the calm normalcy amidst the storm he constantly navigated. "You're late," she said, teasing gently. "I thought perhaps you'd decided the city needed saving again." He smiled faintly, dropping into the chair across from her. "Some things never change," he said. "But tonight, I'm here for you." She tilted her head, curious. "For me?" "For you," he confirmed. "Not for power, not for control, not for the streets. Just for you. I need you to know that. Her eyes softened, and she reached across the table, letting her hand rest lightly on his. The touch was gentle, grounding, and yet it carried a weight of unspoken trust and understanding. I know, she said quietly, and I trust you. Even knowing who you are, the life you lead, and the risks, I trust you. You've shown me who you really are, not just the man the world fears. He swallowed hard, the intensity of her words settling deep in his chest. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future. Not a fantastical dream, but a real, tangible possibility. One where danger would always lurk at the edges, but where trust, love, and connection could thrive at the center. You've changed me, he admitted, voice low. I've spent so long in shadows, chasing nothing but power and indulgence. But with you, I've learned that there's more to life than fear, more to existence than control. You've taught me, without even trying, what it means to care for someone beyond myself. She smiled, softly, and squeezed his hand. And you've taught me too, she said. I've learned that courage comes in many forms, that trust can be earned in small, quiet moments, that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up over and over, even when the world is messy or dangerous. The words resonated deep within him, affirming what he had come to realize over these past months. He couldn't erase his past, nor could he dissolve the empire he ruled, but he could choose how to exist within it. And now he wanted to exist for something more, for her, for them. The next days were a delicate balance. He continued to oversee his operations, maintain his networks, and navigate the ever-present danger of rival gangs. But alongside that, he found space to nurture their connection. They met in quiet cafes, walked along the river at night, shared books and ideas, and spoke openly about their hopes, fears, and dreams. Each moment strengthened their bond, proving that even in a world of chaos, trust and love could flourish. One evening, after a particularly long day of city dealings, he joined her at a small bookshop tucked away in a quiet street. She was perusing the shelves, her face illuminated by the warm light. He watched her quietly, a rare smile tugging at his lips. You've been busy, she observed, noticing his lingering gaze. I've been thinking, he said, about balance, about life, about us. She turned, curiosity evident in her eyes. Us? Yes, he said, stepping closer. I realize now that life doesn't have to be only about power, fear, or indulgence. It can be about connection, trust, and love. It can be about caring enough to risk vulnerability, to risk everything, for something real. And I want that with you. Her lips curved into a gentle smile, her eyes shining with understanding and warmth. Then we'll navigate it together, she said simply. The danger, the unknown, the chaos, we'll face it together. I trust you, and I know you'll protect me. And I'll protect you in return. Your heart, your soul, and everything that makes you who you are. In that quiet, suspended moment, he understood fully what she meant. Trust was not passive. It was an active choice, a commitment to see each other clearly and accept the world as it was. And she had chosen him. He took her hand, holding it firmly but tenderly. Then together it is, he said. Through every challenge, every threat, every uncertainty, together. As they walked out into the cool night air, the city lights reflecting off the pavement, he felt a sense of peace that had been foreign to him his entire life. The streets were still dangerous, the empire still demanding, but for the first time he was not alone. And she was not just an object of fleeting desire or fascination. She was a partner, a confidant, a grounding force in a world built on chaos. She had reshaped his understanding of life, trust, and love, not by force or persuasion, but by showing him the quiet power of authenticity, courage, and care. That night, they stopped along the riverbank, the water shimmering under the moonlight. He turned to her, eyes searching, voice soft but unwavering. You've given me something I never thought possible, he said. A reason to believe in more than fear, more than power, more than control. You've given me hope, for a life that matters beyond myself. She smiled, her hand slipping into his, her warmth grounding him in a way nothing else ever had. And you've given me trust, protection, and a chance to love someone fully, even someone with a dangerous past. We're not perfect, but we're real. And that's enough. He nodded, absorbing the weight and truth of her words. In the chaos of his world, in the shadows of his empire, he had found something far more valuable than luxury, power, or pleasure. Genuine love and connection. As they stood together, hand in hand, overlooking the calm river beneath the bustling city, he felt a quiet determination settle within him. No matter what threats arose, no matter how dangerous the world around them became, they would face it together. And for the first time in his life, he truly believed in the possibility of a future that was not just survival, but living, loving, and being fully human. She had changed him, and he had chosen to follow that change, embracing the life they could build together. A life where love and trust were not weaknesses, but the ultimate strength. And under the lights of Seoul, with the river stretching endlessly before them, he realized that he had finally found something worth more than his empire, his indulgences, or his power, her. And she had found him. Complex, dangerous, yet capable of love beyond anything she had imagined. Together, they stepped into the night, uncertain of what lay ahead, but certain of one thing. They would face it side by side, and for the first time, the world felt full of possibility.